Okay, hello, thanks for joining us today, and we're gonna have an update on what's happening in Georgia right now. But first of all, I'm gonna ask you to introduce yourself so that you can let us know what you're doing in Georgia and how you got involved with the demonstrations that are happening.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'm a foreign affairs person for a political party, DROA, which is now in an alliance with another political party, Girchi, More Freedom. So our parties are liberal parties, very much in opposition to this government of Georgia that we consider to be a Russian regime. And it's not just us anymore. Like, we were one of the first ones who dubbed the regime as such, but now it's increasingly common to call the regime as such, even abroad, not just in Georgia, particularly in the last few days amid this protest wave. I also teach at a university. I teach post-Soviet transitions, among other subjects. I studied my master's at the University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom, and I'm also doing a PhD at the Tbilisi State University in Georgia, which is the largest state university in Georgia and the first university in Caucasus.
Just one question on the situation. I understand that there was a vote, a first vote, and it went through. Last year, they failed to get the law through because of the protests. What do you think will happen this year? I understand the final vote will be on the 17th of May. Do you think there is a chance to stop them again?
So I want to underline that last year's protests were not like any other protests that Georgia had seen before, because it used to be like that people were very much afraid of getting dubbed as violent by the government, and people used to have like complexes not to escalate the situation, so they would just like go attend the protest and go home without much pressure on the government in terms of like blocking the parliament entrances and so on. Well, of course, there had been instances of escalation, but I mean, like, the general public felt that way. And suddenly last year, amid the crackdown, people realized that they actually have to fight back hard. So the government, I'm pretty sure they did not expect people to give them such a hard punch back. And that is why they backed off, because they realized that either they would withdraw the law, or they would, in a couple of days of more protests and crackdowns, have to leave the country and lose the government altogether. So in a way, it was in my honest opinion, and many agree with me, a mental and cultural revolution in Georgia last year around this Russian law. It wasn't just the response to the law in terms of like methods of confrontation with the police, but it was also the public calls to ostracize socially those members of the parliament who would vote for the law. And that doesn't really happen in Georgia. In Georgia, everyone knows everyone is friends with everyone. They attend birthday parties and everything together. So it's a really harsh deal to ostracize someone socially. And there were, for the first time, calls to do that. And also culture sphere workers like artists, sports people, they don't usually express political opinion. And suddenly everyone began expressing opinion against this law. I'm not saying that these are the only reasons it succeeded. There were other reasons as well. But these were important. So after major crackdown and major punchback from the protesters, they, as I said, had to withdraw the law, no, technically it wasn't withdrawn. They had to hold a second vote and let it be voted down by the opposition. This year, I mean, they understood the risks they were carrying when they reintroduced the law. So they seem even more dead set on pushing the law, and that's what they state. They say that they will implement the law, they will pass the law no matter what happens. Initially, I thought that their tactic would be to crack down on us with full force. But now it seems to me that maybe they want to tire us out and to just let the protest, in their opinion, like wither away and just go home, you know. On the other hand, they might be waiting for people to escalate, to blame people for being violent and discredit the protest, or at least attempt to do that, you know. So I honestly don't know what will happen in terms of procedures, but what I do know is that the vibe and the attitudes in the Georgian public is unlike anything before, and the public is extremely furious. And it's not just the law, it's that we realize that they will be choking all sorts of independence of media, of CSOs, and most importantly, that this law will prevent us from European integration, which has been Georgia's national aspiration for like centuries. Maybe like others don't know the history of Georgia that much, but for Georgians, it's a generational and dream of centuries. And suddenly we are already EU candidates because thanks to unwavering like efforts by the Georgian public and the EU geopolitics and the Ukraine war. And like we are one step away from accession negotiations, and this government is very purposefully and very deliberately depriving it from us, you know. I'm pretty sure that it's a Kremlin directive, because if we also look at the big picture, last year it was in Bosnia, Milorad Dodik, the president of Republika Srpska, who adopted the same law simultaneously with Georgia last March. And now, this March, it was Kyrgyzstan who adopted the law. And again, this law was reintroduced in Georgia in early April. So it cannot all just be a coincidence. Plus, the Russian elite members like Dmitry Medvedev and Speaker of Russian Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, and the Eurasian ideologist Alexander Dugin, they all expressed support for the law. And Volodin, the Speaker of the Russian Duma, he even said that the hysteria around this law suggests that the Brussels and the Washington, D.C., they aim to overthrow the Georgian government, and this law prevents them to do so. So they're essentially saying that this Georgian government is their government. It's
basically one of the many attempts of taking over Georgia from the Russian. We've seen they tried in 2008. They took 20% of Georgia, then they stopped, but to a certain extent, since they are continuing, as I understand, to move forward the border, maybe a meter today, 10 meters tomorrow, but they are still moving forward, even if there is no military action, and the Georgian government can't do anything about it. And now they are creating what I perceive a new sort of Euromaidan scenario in Georgia, with Georgia basically one step from entering negotiation to get into the EU, and this law basically kicking Georgia out straight away from the negotiation, because this law would be incompatible with the EU law.
Well, yes, they want to impede Georgia's European integration every way possible. If you look at the steps that the Georgian government took immediately before the European Commission's decisions on Georgia's candidate status, you will understand that they wanted to sabotage the candidate status in the first place. Like they held the vote on the impeachment of the president of Georgia, who is now acting autonomously from the Georgian Dream government. The Georgian Dream is the ruling party's name. They almost impeached her for her visits to the European Union to lobby for Georgia's candidate status, just because the government didn't like her personally and didn't trust what she would say, like criticisms of the government at European capitals. They didn't let her go there. And then they almost impeached her for her going there with her own money. And things like that. It was the vote was held a few weeks before the EU Commission's decision on Georgia. Of course, it's and plus one of the most prominent media managers, was also jailed just before the EU Commission's decision. Yeah, a government who wants to get the status doesn't do that, immediately before the decision to irritate the European Union. So I'm pretty sure they were very shocked to still get the candidate status, and the EU did a huge favor to the people of Georgia because they appreciated our unwavering efforts, and they assess the geopolitical circumstances correctly, I think. So thanks you very much. Yeah, no, they were probably shocked to still get the status. There were probably many apology phone calls to Russia, and now they are sabotaging another step, to the accession talks. So I actually don't know what will happen about this law, but I know that the society, it feels different. Like I'm always optimistic, but this time there's a different mood in the Georgian society. There's a mood that we don't want these Russians ruling us anymore. It's also interesting that they would schedule the third vote on May the 17th, International Day against fighting International Day for fighting homophobia, because they want to label everyone who protests the law as LGBT, and they want to capitalize on the conservative layers of the society. And I want to underline that Georgia, like 20 years ago, was extremely conservative, and to a degree, Georgia still is. It's a society where sex before marriage and LGBT issues are issues simultaneously. So we didn't have time to go through these social mental changes over the decades like Western countries did, So everything is happening in Georgia all together. And for many people in Georgia, it's a big dose of change. And so we do have a lot of opponents to the LGBT. It's interesting whether LGBT will be a sufficient issue enough to make Georgians reject the European dream. I personally do not believe so. I think any issue will fade in comparison to the European integration issue and opposition to Russia issue. Yeah.
What is the power? I understand that the president, Salome Zurabishvili, she is completely pro-EU. And I understand that she said that she is willing to veto the law even if it were to pass. How much power does she have to hold on to that? And what could a Georgian Dream do about it?
Well, the presidential veto is unfortunately only a symbolic gesture because it only requires a simple majority to override it. Now, 83 MPs voted for the law, and to override the presidential veto, you only need 76 MPs. We have a 150-member parliament, so 50% plus one is already enough to override the presidential veto. Unfortunately, it's only a symbolic power, and it will only prolong the process for maybe a couple of days or something like that. In a way, like a symbolic boost, like for the society and for the EU and the Western partners to see that even the president is vetoing the law, But in essence, it won't really have much weight, and it won't make a difference. So she also said that this president, she said that in October, we have to make sure to outvote not the Georgian Dream, but the Georgian nightmare, she called the ruling party.
In October, there will be the general elections, and that's why they are doing this now, to basically trying to control more the propaganda nearer the time. Is that correct?
So there are several suggestions why they're bringing the law back. Apart from the fact that it's directly from the Kremlin, there might be other considerations, such as to silence local election observation NGOs, because if the law passes and the NGOs swear that they will not register as foreign agents, it means that they won't have the operational capacity and the rights to observe elections, So in that regard, international observations are even more important than before. And in Georgia, elections are not really free or fair. Like the OSCE reported, I think, last elections that it was the bare minimum sufficiency of what can be considered democratic elections, you know. But what everyone should understand about
it's not just about propaganda. It's about to prevent international observer to check onto the regularity of the elections.
To prevent local observers, I would say Georgian NGOs to observe the elections. It's probably one of the reasons. I mean, of course, the entire election outcome is not dependent solely on Georgian NGOs and their observation capacity, of course, but it's just one of the steps that, one of the benefits that this law would bring them, you know. It's very hard to say what precisely is their aim, or whether they are autonomous at all, or like, even if they pass the law, and if they don't pass the law, their reputation has suffered immensely. So logically, no one understands why they would bring back the law. Only explanation for me is, again, that Russia is pushing for it. But on the other hand, I still don't realize why Russia would push for this law right now, because it must be in their utmost interest for the Georgian Dream Party to win the elections in October, because it's the very last Russian government in Georgia, and I'm not exaggerating.
Isn't it that they fear that they actually won't win, and that's why they are trying to make sure they can win?
I also thought so, but in that regard, it seems more logical for them to do a major crackdown in the streets and do a Belarusization of the country before the elections, you know, like crack down on everyone before elections in the streets and win elections against that background. But for now, it seems that the government is not very eager for a crackdown. And that's where I'm lost in logic, you know. I mean, everything is still ahead. God forbid they might still do a major crackdown, but they already had a few chances and they didn't. But yeah, I want to underline that the Georgian Dream government with the oligarch Ivanishvili in power. So it's a one man's party. This man is in the shadows. He has almost 1/3 of assets of Georgia's GDP. Like, his assets are worth almost 1/3 of Georgia's GDP. He's the only man in Georgia who has that kind of money. He doesn't have rivals in terms of resources.
But I understand
Also,
is it correct that many of his assets are actually in Russia?
I don't think that his assets are currently in Russia, but he's a Russian-made billionaire. So he made his billions in Russia in the 90s. And he used to be as far as I know, he used to be the biggest individual shareholder of Gazprom when he came to power, like 1%. But I want to underline for the public that when this government was voted for in 2012, it was, people were not voting for a pro-Russian government. They acted very European. They just acted in some domestic issues. They pretended that they would be better than the previous government. So it wasn't really a geopolitical issue people were voting on. This government, they unmasked themselves as Russians only very recently. And for most of the population, it became obvious just after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and this Russian law last year. So the last couple of years. Yeah, because they could not openly be pro-Russian, they have an 85% pro-European population to control. So because now we have fully proportional elections, no one single party will be able to hold power, and one party rule will finally end in Georgia, which used to be the case before, which means that and plus Russia doesn't have any social capital, no moral attraction, no one in Georgia who would want Russia, you know? So there's this reality that this government is very unpopular. They are on the verge of losing power. But then Russia will never again have its own government in Georgia, you know? So they are losing Georgia, and by extension, they're also losing Armenia and potentially also grip on Azerbaijan, you know? Because Armenia is already distancing itself from Russia, currently even more so than Georgia. And when the Georgian dream is unseated and the European power comes to Georgian government, that's the end of Russia's basically dominance in the South Caucasus. And Russians cannot allow that, of course. And plus, there's another important issue. Georgia just adopted tax code amendments, which frees all offshore, all assets brought from offshores to Georgia. They will be free from all duties and taxes, which means that not only will our oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili will benefit from that law in anticipation of international sanctions, but this law will be also used potentially by Russian oligarchs. So Russia needs the Georgian dream geopolitically to hold the Caucasus in the long term.
To understand is some sort of money laundering law that allows basically the Russian oligarch to launder their money in Georgia.
Yeah, there will be basically their money will be untouched and safe in Georgia, whatever they do. So Russia needs the Georgian dream geopolitically in the Caucasus, and Russia needs them in power also to keep their money safe. So they want Georgia as their pocket. They will make Georgia a safe haven for Russian money, and they will use this foreign agents law to shut down any organization that investigates them, And today, one of the members of the parliament from the Georgian Dream, Iraklis Arkua, he openly said that after this law is adopted, all the NGOs will, the NGO heads, he named several surnames, Lomjari and Gigauri, they are just representatives of major NGOs. They will disappear, and true Georgians who serve the interests of Georgia will appear. So he basically announced in advance that, yes, this law is to crack down on civil society and to replace them with government-organized NGOs, the gongos. Yeah, and about transparency, many different laws guarantee transparency in Georgia already. And Ombudsman of Georgia is not a Georgian dream person, although a big part of opposition has many times accused him of cooperation with the Georgian dream. He's still from another party, and even the ombudsman's office stated that the transparency of organizations is already guaranteed, and this law is not necessary. But if you want further transparency, you can add some stricter rules to the transparency codes or something. There is absolutely no need to bring the term of foreign agent and label people as such, Plus, in Georgia, and the word agent is absolutely synonymous with a spy, which means that they're calling everyone foreign spies, which means they're calling everyone enemies of the people, like from the USSR, public enemies. Plus the organizations that this law would cover is excessive. Even like animal rights and animal shelters, any organization, basically, other than sports organizations, who and all Georgian NGOs and community work depend on Western money, because there is no local money in Georgia. Only one guy has his money, and he's in government now. So all NGOs in Georgia need Western money, and they're basically saying that the West is an enemy. Those who receive Western money for any reason, like animal shelters or something, they are enemies of the people as foreign spies and foreign agents. So they are just flipping friends and enemies. For them, enemies the West, and Russia is a friend. They're not openly calling Russia a friend, but there are hints of such, For the Georgian population, the West is not an enemy. We want to be full members of Western society, and that's why there's such opposition to this law. We do not perceive the EU and West as colonizers at all. We think that Western interests and Georgian interests are the same in this century and context. So when somebody receives, I don't know, some funding from Sweden or Germany, it's seen as a very domestic thing, like your brother gives you and lends you money. It's not seen as foreign or anything that should be. Plus, it all depends on context. Like some say that the law will also target Russian funded NGOs or something. But first of all, there are no Russian-funded NGOs in the country. All the funds that Russia gives them are in cash. Second of all, any Russian money and any Russian organizations in Georgia are in cooperation with the government. So in essence, even if it in theory applied to them, it will still be used against Western money and Western NGOs. It will not be used against Russian money at all.
And what do you think will happen if the 17th of May this law will get through? How do you think people will take it? Could this lead to an escalation of the demonstrations or of the turmoils?
So it's very hard to predict in general what happens in Georgia, because even last year, we didn't expect people to protest much at all, let alone like bring a revolutionary force that would like force the government to withdraw the law. So as my friend says, the best and the worst thing about Georgia is that we don't know when Georgians explode. It's bad because we don't know, but it's good because the government doesn't know either, you know. I'm pretty sure, like, I will be extremely surprised if the law is adopted without any escalations and clashes. Like, with the temperature outside, with the mood of the people, it will be very hard to avoid confrontation. The Georgian Dream government will have to literally, I don't know, like hide the police for them not to be facing people, and then like count on the public escalating to crack down on them. Like, I don't know, like I really don't see the law passing without clashes, but I do get the feeling that it's getting increasingly impossible for the Georgian Dream to hold the country any further, because there's this atmosphere in the air, you know, that it's not sustainable. Their rule is not sustainable for any longer. I don't know, like morally, I expect anything from them. Like, nothing would surprise me. It's just one thing that good about it is that since the Georgian society is very consolidated on Europe, and it's not Ukraine in 2014 when the public was split in 50-50, maybe they will be smart enough not to use real bullets, because that will be worse for them.
So, and what we're seeing, it does remind Euromaidan quite a lot.
This government propaganda usually tries to intimidate us for the use of the word revolution, you know, and they're like, oh, are you like bloodsuckers or something? You're using the revolution word. And they want us not to pressure them in that way. But I mean, we will not start anything, you know, but if it gets to that point, of course we will revolt over living in slavery, you know. A lot of words, like, the key of revolution is in the government's hand. If the government responds to its public and population, there will be no revolution, of course. And it's not our aim to make a revolution, but with all due respect to my Belarusian friends, and I know them personally, and they fought really bravely, we would rather have a Maidan and succeed than live in Belarus in Lukashenko's regime, you know. Yeah, of course, Yanukovych and Ivanishvili are in many ways similar. They all have the Kremlin playbook, and they are all bred from the same institutions.
Thank you so much for your help. And well, maybe we can speak again in the next few weeks to see how things are going, and we can catch up again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
For being with us. Bye, Marika.
Thank you so much for inviting.